Welcome to this scientific lecture on the neural architecture of inventive thinking. Today we will explore how different brain networks cooperate to produce breakthrough insights and creative discoveries. Let me start by asking a fundamental question. What happens in our brain during those magical eureka moments? How do sudden insights emerge from neural activity? Modern neuroscience has identified three primary brain networks that are crucial for inventive thinking. These are the default mode network, the executive control network, and the salience network. These three networks form a dynamic system. The default mode network is associated with spontaneous thought and mind wandering. The executive control network handles focused attention and logical reasoning. The salience network acts as a switch between the other two. Let's dive deeper into the default mode network, often abbreviated as DMN. This network was only discovered in the early 2000s, and its discovery revolutionized our understanding of the resting brain. The default mode network is most active when your mind wanders freely, when you daydream, or when you're not focused on the external world. Key regions include the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex. These areas show synchronized activity during rest. The medial prefrontal cortex at the front and posterior cingulate cortex at the back form a core hub. Neural connections between these regions facilitate spontaneous thought generation. The default mode network enables several crucial functions, accessing autobiographical memories, simulating future scenarios, and understanding other people's mental states, what we call theory of mind. Now let's examine the executive control network, or ECN. This network is essentially the opposite of the default mode network in many ways. The executive control network activates when you engage in focused, goal-directed cognitive tasks. It's what allows you to concentrate and solve problems systematically. Key regions include the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the posterior parietal cortex. These areas coordinate attention and working memory. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in both hemispheres connects to parietal regions. This bilateral network enables sustained attention and manipulation of information in working memory. The executive control network enables working memory maintenance, voluntary attention control, and step-by-step logical reasoning. It's your brain's focused problem-solving mode. The third critical network is the salience network. This network acts as a dynamic switch between the default mode and executive control networks. The salience network constantly monitors both your internal thoughts and external environment to detect what's important or behaviorally relevant. The primary nodes are the anterior insula and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. These regions are involved in awareness and response selection. The salience network acts like a radar system. It sends signals outward to monitor various brain regions and determines which network should be active at any given moment. Now let's examine some classic eureka moments from history and what they tell us about the neural basis of insight. These historical examples provide clues about how breakthrough thinking emerges. The most famous eureka moment belongs to Archimedes. According to legend, he discovered the principle of buoyancy while relaxing in a bath. But what was happening in his brain? Archimedes was in a relaxed state, not actively trying to solve the problem. His default mode network was likely highly active, allowing spontaneous associations to form. When he noticed the water displacement, his salience network detected the relevance, triggering the insight. Another famous example is the chemist Auguste Kekulé, who discovered the ring structure of benzene after a daydream about a snake biting its own tail. Kekulé was in a hypnagogic state, between waking and sleeping. This state is characterized by high default mode network activity and reduced executive control. Visual imagery from the default mode network provided the structural insight that had eluded his logical analysis. This raises an important question. Why does relaxation or mind wandering facilitate creative insights? Shouldn't focused thinking be more effective? The answer lies in the different cognitive styles of these networks. The default mode network enables broad, associative thinking. It connects distant concepts and explores unusual combinations. In contrast, the executive control network focuses attention narrowly on goal-relevant information. While excellent for systematic problem-solving, this narrow focus can prevent you from seeing novel connections between distant concepts. Compare the two modes visually. Executive control creates a narrow, linear path through problem space. Default mode creates a web of associations, allowing unexpected connections to form between distant concepts. Modern neuroimaging studies have provided direct evidence for these mechanisms. Let me describe some key findings from recent research. A landmark study by Beatty and colleagues in 2016 used functional MRI to scan people's brains while they performed creative tasks. They found something remarkable. Highly creative individuals showed strong functional connectivity between all three networks: default mode, executive control, and salience. It wasn't just one network, but the cooperation between networks that predicted creative ability. Here's a simplified representation of their findings. As the connectivity between networks increases along the horizontal axis, creative performance increases along the vertical axis. The red line shows the positive correlation. Another important line of research comes from Kunios and Beeman, who studied the neural signatures of sudden insight, the aha moment. They found a distinctive burst of high-frequency gamma-band neural activity in the right temporal cortex about 300 milliseconds before people reported a sudden insight. This gamma burst represents the moment when distant associations suddenly cohere into a solution. This graph shows neural activity over time. Notice the baseline activity in blue, then suddenly at around 3.5 seconds, there's a massive gamma band burst in red. This is the neural signature of insight, the moment of breakthrough. These findings help explain a well-known phenomenon in creative problem solving, the incubation effect. Taking breaks from a problem often leads to better solutions. Why does stepping away from a problem help you solve it? Common sense suggests you should keep working, yet breaks are often more effective. The answer is that breaks allow your default mode network to reorganize the problem representation. While you're not consciously thinking about it, your default mode network continues working on it unconsciously, forming new associations. The executive control network can get stuck in local minima, repeatedly trying the same unsuccessful approaches. The default mode network explores the problem space more globally, potentially finding novel solution paths. On the left, focused work leads to getting stuck in a rut. On the right, during an incubation break, the default mode network explores many possibilities and discovers a solution path that focused attention missed. Now let's examine the dynamic interplay between networks during the creative process. Creative thinking isn't static. It involves shifting between different brain states. In the first phase, you encode and understand the problem. The executive control network is dominant here, as you carefully analyze constraints and requirements. In the second phase, you explore possible solutions. The default mode network becomes more active, generating diverse possibilities through associative thinking. In the third phase, the salience network suddenly detects a promising solution among the associations. This triggers the aha moment and shifts attention to that solution. In the final phase, the executive control network returns to evaluate whether the solution actually works, testing it against the original constraints. This graph shows the dynamic fluctuation of network activity across the creative process. Green represents executive control, red represents default mode, and cyan represents salience network activity. Notice how they take turns being dominant. Not everyone's brain networks function identically. There are meaningful individual differences that affect creative thinking ability. Highly creative individuals show more flexible switching between networks. They can readily shift from focused analysis to broad exploration and back again. Less creative individuals often show either rigid network dominance, staying too long in one mode, or poor connectivity between networks, preventing effective cooperation. On the left, high creative individuals show bidirectional flexible switching between network states. On the right, low creative individuals show isolated, rigid network activity with poor communication. Now we arrive at the practical question. Can we deliberately shift our brain states to enhance inventive thinking? The neuroscience suggests yes, we can. Strategy 1 is to deliberately alternate between focused work sessions and diffuse thinking breaks. Don't try to maintain constant focus. A practical implementation is Pomodoro-style intervals. Work with full executive control focus for 25 minutes. Then, take a 5-minute break where you allow default mode activation through mind-wandering or light physical activity. Strategy 2 is to prime default mode network activation before engaging in creative tasks. This pre-activates the associative thinking mode. Effective methods include walking, especially in nature, taking a shower, brief meditation, or simply allowing yourself to daydream for 10 to 15 minutes before creative work. Strategy 3 is to reduce extraneous cognitive load. When working memory is overloaded with irrelevant details, it suppresses default mode network activity and prevents creative associations. Externalize information by writing notes, drawing diagrams, or using external memory aids. This frees up working memory resources, allowing the default mode network more freedom to make novel connections. Strategy 4 involves manipulating your environment to shift brain states. Novel environments naturally activate default mode network exploration. Changing your physical location can trigger new associative patterns. Quiet spaces with minimal distractions reduce demands on the salience network, allowing it to focus on internal thought processes rather than external stimuli. Compare these environments. On the left, a distraction-heavy space creates salience network overload, constantly pulling attention externally. On the right, a quiet novel space allows the default mode network freedom to explore internally. Strategy 5 uses cognitive reframing to activate different network configurations. One powerful technique is constraint relaxation. Temporarily imagine the problem without certain constraints. This activates broader default mode network exploration. Ask yourself, what if this limitation didn't exist? What if cost were no object? What if we had unlimited time? This questioning activates counterfactual reasoning circuits in the default mode network. Another technique is analogical reasoning. Deliberately seek solutions from distant domains and map them to your problem. Ask, how is this problem similar to problems in nature, or in art, or in music? This forces your default mode network to create remote associations between disparate knowledge domains. Analogical reasoning creates a bridge between your problem domain on the left and a distant domain on the right. The yellow arrow represents the main analogy, while the green lines represent multiple feature mappings between domains. Before we conclude, we must discuss sleep. Sleep plays a crucial role in creative thinking through memory consolidation and network reorganization. During REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, the default mode network shows high activity while executive control is largely offline. This creates ideal conditions for novel associations. Sleep doesn't just rest the brain. It actively strengthens useful neural connections while pruning away unhelpful ones, a process called synaptic homeostasis. Research shows that sleep, both before and after learning, enhances creative problem solving. Pre-sleep clears mental clutter. Post-sleep consolidates new associations. This graph shows default mode network activity across sleep stages. During non-REM sleep in blue, activity is relatively quiet. During REM sleep in red, default mode network activity surges, creating the neural conditions for creative associations. This leads to an important question. Can we actually train our brain networks to cooperate more effectively? Is network flexibility something we can improve? The answer is yes. Just as you can train physical flexibility through yoga, you can train cognitive flexibility through deliberate practice of switching between thinking modes. Regular meditation practice has been shown to increase network flexibility. Mindfulness meditation particularly enhances salience network function, improving your ability to direct attention. Engaging in creative hobbies like music, art, or writing strengthens cooperation between default mode and executive control networks. These activities require alternating between spontaneous generation and focused refinement. Pursuing diverse experiences builds richer associative networks in your default mode. The more varied your knowledge and experience, the more remote associations your brain can potentially form. Let me illustrate these principles with a real-world example of how they operate in scientific discovery. Consider the discovery of DNA structure by Watson and Crick in 1953. This breakthrough exemplifies network cooperation. They spent months in intense focused study of X-ray crystallography data, analyzing constraints and chemical principles. This was executive control network work. They then built physical models, playing with different structural arrangements. This hands-on exploration engaged their default mode networks, allowing spatial and visual reasoning. The breakthrough came through sudden insight about complementary base pairing. Salience network detected the significance of this arrangement, triggering the eureka moment. Finally, they rigorously verified that their double helix model satisfied all known constraints. Executive control returned to validate the insight. This flowchart shows the iterative process. Executive control analyzes data, default mode explores models, salience detects insight, executive control verifies. This cycle repeats until breakthrough. We should also briefly discuss the neurochemistry underlying these network dynamics. Different neurotransmitters modulate network activity. Dopamine enhances flexible switching between networks. Moderate dopamine levels facilitate creative thinking by allowing fluid transitions between focused and diffuse modes. Norepinephrine modulates salience network function. It helps you detect important signals and shift attention appropriately between internal and external focus. Acetylcholine enhances focused attention and executive control function. It helps maintain goal-directed behavior and working memory. Serotonin modulates default mode network activity and overall mood. Balanced serotonin supports healthy mind wandering without rumination. These four neurotransmitter systems interact to modulate creative cognition. Dopamine for flexibility, norepinephrine for salience, acetylcholine for focus, serotonin for exploration. Their balanced interaction supports optimal creative function. Before we conclude, I must acknowledge current limitations and point toward future research directions. While we understand general principles, individual differences in network function are not fully characterized. Why some people naturally show more network flexibility remains partly mysterious. Most evidence is correlational. Causal interventions to directly manipulate specific networks and measure creativity outcomes remain methodologically challenging. Future research will explore real-time neurofeedback training, where people learn to voluntarily shift network configurations to enhance creativity. Another frontier is pharmacological enhancement, developing compounds that specifically improve network cooperation rather than just boosting one system. A fascinating possibility is AI-assisted brain state optimization, where algorithms analyze your neural patterns and suggest personalized strategies to enhance your creative cognition. Let me summarize the key principles we've covered about the neural architecture of inventive thinking. First, creativity isn't localized to one brain region or network. It emerges from dynamic cooperation between default mode, executive control, and salience networks. Second, breakthrough insights emerge when the default mode network forms novel associations, and the salience network suddenly detects their relevance. Third, the ability to flexibly switch between focused and diffuse thinking modes is a key predictor of creative ability. Fourth, we can deliberately use environmental and cognitive strategies to shift our brain states toward configurations that support inventive thinking. Fifth, network cooperation can be enhanced through practice, diverse experiences, and training in cognitive flexibility. Finally, here are concrete practical takeaways you can implement immediately to enhance your creative thinking. 1. Don't try to maintain constant focus. Schedule regular breaks to allow default mode network activation and unconscious processing. 2. Create different environments for different thinking modes. Use focused spaces for analysis and varied or novel spaces for generative thinking. 3. Practice deliberately switching between focused and diffuse modes. Notice when you're stuck in one mode and consciously shift to the other. 4. Actively seek diverse experiences outside your primary domain. These build richer associative networks that fuel creative connections. 5. Prioritize adequate sleep, especially when working on creative challenges. Sleep consolidates learning and strengthens novel associations. Thank you for joining this exploration of the neural architecture of inventive thinking. By understanding how your brain networks cooperate to produce insights, you can deliberately cultivate the conditions for breakthrough thinking in your own work and life.